Alright, so my name's Emily, for those who don't know me already. I'm going to talk about putting the U.S. on a early war federal issue blanket. This is freshly washed, newly minted U.S. federal issue blanket. These come without the U.S. sewn on. If you would like the U.S. sewn on, we can do that for an additional fee. But I'm just going to show you the best way to get that U.S. put on this blanket. Some tools that you're going to need if you're going to freehand it. Now we do have pattern, which I will show you later, but if you want to just pin the pattern on, you can then sew through the piece of paper and then rip the paper off afterwards. This is a cross stitch hoop. It's two pieces, one goes on the back, one goes on the front of the fabric. Squish it together, tighten it up, holds the fabric tight. These are invaluable when doing this. You can do it without, I don't recommend it. A ruler of some sort. I also love this little jiggy doozy what's it. Official name is a sewing and knitting gauge. It's got a little slider here, has centimeters and inches. I love this. It's basically a sewing version of a caliper. You can adjust it. Best $2, $3, $4, however much these are spent if you're going to be doing a lot of sewing. We'll need sewing needles, some scissors, and lastly yarn. When you purchase a blanket, we will be sending the yarn with you. With the blanket, this is a fingering weight. I get this, it comes in a pallet like this. It's a 2-ply yarn. It's thinner than worsted weight, thinner than what you're going to get when you go to the store. I find that just the worsted weight, which is a 3-ply yarn most of the time, it's too thick, ends up looking too heavy on the blanket. Based off of pictures of originals, a fingering weight yarn like this is the closest match we can get without doing some sort of custom yarn run. This is also fingering weight wool is was very common during the time in knitting and crocheting patterns. So fingering weight wool, and then you're going to want an upholstery or embroidery needle. These are larger than regular needles. They're larger, they're thicker, they have a bigger hole on the end so the yarn can fit through it. And regular sewing needle will not work. When we send the pattern, we'll send the wool and the pattern with each one of these. We will include what size of needle that you need to get. First step is to find a middle. Fold the blanket once, lengthwise, like so. And then you're going to fold it the other way. So it's folded twice, once one way, once the other way. And the peak here are the raw edges. The peak, this is your middle. You're going to take a sewing pen, you're going to mark this out, just like that. So you know where the middle is, so you know where to put the U.S. Then I'm going to do this off camera, but I'm going to lay it out and put the hoop on. Alright, so I got my hoop on. One thing that I did do as well while it was on the floor, which is really important, is I laid it out and I marked an up with the pin. Right here I put in so that way I know which way to orientate my US towards, so that I don't end up with a US that's crooked on the blanket. Should be up and down with the top, the US facing one of the dark stripes and the bottom of the US facing the other. So let me adjust this down so you can see what I'm doing. So we have here our plate. It's our top. You're gonna have to bear with me here being a little upside down. Let's see what we can do. Alright. This will work either orientation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark out with pens where my US are going to go. Measurements on originals vary anywhere from 4 3/4 to 5 1/4 in height, and 2 3/4 to 3 inches in width. One thing that is fairly uniform though is there's 1.5 inches in between the letters. So I mark out a roughly 3 by 5 space for each letter and go from there. And I start with just marking this out straight across. Start like that, go over 3 inches, another pen, 1.5 inches. And actually I'm going to move this over a little bit. I do try and get it mostly centered. Alright, there we go, that's a little better. Another 1.5 inches. And then 3 inches from there. Okay. So from there we're going to measure out. I do it right in the middle so I make sure that both letters, the one thing you do want to watch is make sure both letters are even top to bottom. That one's not higher than the other. So here we go, top corner of this one down. Top corner of this one down. And again, I really stress finding your top point, your orientation, while it's laying down. Do not trust the weave of the fabric. This fabric actually has a twill weave, which means that it alternates, which the warp and the weft. So you have your warp, your weft. It alternates threads that it goes over, so it creates a diagonal weave up the fabric. Because of this, you can be deceiving as far as it makes you think that the top of the fabric's actually on the diagonal. Alright, so 5 inches down here. And a matching 5 inches over here. Again, I'm not worrying about being perfect here, but what I am going to make sure, that you're not picking up either your pants or other parts of the blanket underneath, because you don't want to sew it together. That will really give you a bad day. The US on these blankets is 3 rows of stitching, independent rows. They are not connected in any way. For each row, I cut about a 3-foot piece of yarn. Squish it through your needle, just like that. And then I wet my finger, pinch it, wrap it around, roll your fingers together, and then grab that roll and pull it tight. This creates a nice little knot at the end of the string. The stitch used is a chain stitch, and start from the back side. I like to start with the U. For some reason it seems sacrilegious to start with the S. You're just going to start up here in the upper right hand corner. So chain stitch. Let's zoom in a little bit here so you can get a close-up of what I'm doing. Chain stitch is you come out, come back in through the same place that you exited the fabric, come down about, however big you want to make your stitches, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch, somewhere in there. I never do more than a 1/2 inch. And what I do, and this is my magic trick, while the needle is through the fabric and I haven't pulled it out yet, I'm going to take this and I'm going to wrap it under the needle like that. and then I'm going to pull it through. That created a loop that I ran my needle through, just like that. There's different ways to do it, and then I just give it and pull it snug. I'm not going to pull it super tight, otherwise you're going to bunch your fabric up when you take the hoop off, and the blanket's not going to look so great. So then, when you go back through, you go back through that loop again. You see this here? Back through the loop, back through the same hole, and hoop makes it a little hard. Just make sure you're going in a straight line. Like so. And pull it tight. Now some people might want to, I can show you another way to do this here, if you're having trouble doing the little string around. That's how I like to do it. I do that for everything, for blanket stitches, for a chain stitch, I do that for buttonholes. That's just how I sew. I like to wrap it around and I don't have to worry about it. If that's too much, that is understandable. You can do it this way. So you pull it till you've got a little bit of a loop left, then run your needle through. Oops, don't get caught on things. And like so. Now I have my other hand back here, so I'm feeling where that needle is and I'm feeling where it's coming in and out. And again, that's also to make sure that I don't stitch blanket pieces together, because I have done that and that is a very sad day. But this is how I like to do it. I can do it quick in a fairly single motion, just like that. So now what I do, just so I know kind of where to angle my curve here for the U at the bottom, I want to make sure your pins stay all the way poked in. I will mark the middle, just so I have a visual cue of when to start turning, where to aim for the bottom. One thing you can do as well, if you don't want to sew through the paper, you can just get some just chalkboard chalk, and you can kind of sketch out your curve. Just lay the fabric down, lay the blanket down on a hard surface. Take that chalk. They do make a fancy transfer paper you can buy at the fabric store as well. You can lay the pattern down on that. Press hard over it. It's basically carbon fiber paper. Press hard and it will leave a color on the fabric here, and then you can just follow the line, or you can use a colored. I'll use colored pencils sometimes when I'm sewing. Those work really well, like a silver or a white or a light gray, or sometimes a blue or black. Just kind of depends on what color fabric I'm working with for the project. Then you can kind of mark on it, and colored pencil washes out really, really well. So as you can see here, I'm starting to make the curve at the bottom of the U, and I will adjust. I will turn my work as I'm going. I won't try and take it around, because I always want it to be going straight, either straight at me or straight away. I find I get in trouble with my stitches if I don't have it either going to me or going away. So I just start kind of tapering it a little bit, and I want it to be so that by the time I hit the middle, I'm going dead straight, so that I'll have one stitch that's dead straight across the bottom. This is especially important for the outside line, which I like to do first. So this is going to be a wider, lazier U versus your inside line, which will be a really tight U. Alright, I'm going to shut the camera off for a minute. I'm going to finish this, and I will rejoin you when I'm doing the inside line. Alright, so we've got the first line done on the outside. Now I'm going to do the inside. I like to do the outside and the inside. Outside first, inside second, middle third. The lines were all 1/2 inch across from each other, so an inch total from the outside to the inside. This is where this little tool comes in super handy. I set it at an inch, and then I can just mark my way along as I go. Make sure that I'm staying uniform in my width, especially when you're down here doing this curve. So again, same deal, you create a little knot. Make sure that I pulled the fabric string through all the way on the other side. And make sure I keep that 1/2 inch spacing. Well, in this case, in a whole inch spacing, because I'm doing the inside, the third line. And you just keep going and just kind of follow. You can see I did my curvature. It's not quite a perfect U, it's a little kind of lopsided off to this side, but once I get this all in, you won't even be able to notice. And also remember, as you're watching this and trying to do it yourself, I have been hand sewing for a decade, doing Civil War, modern sewing, detail work, etc. So this is very easy, simple work for me. Do not expect to be able to go as fast as I am going. Give yourself time, be patient, take breaks, don't get frustrated. Just understand that this is something I've been doing for a long time. This is my passion. I love to sew. Okay. So on the inside line, I make it a little pointier. So here I'm not bothering with turning it just because it's going to be such a sharp incline back up. Just my through string here. Make sure I'm looking good. Yep. And the key to doing this kind of work, or hand sewing of any kind, is just finding a rhythm. And it's just don't lose my other pins. Just finding a rhythm, regularity, a muscle memory that works for you. I'll show you how to finish this off. And make sure it's fairly level with the stitching on both sides. And you just go back in and this is what it looks on the back side. So how I finish this off, give yourself a bit of yarn to work with, give it a good little tug, and then I catch just a couple strands of the blanket make a loop. Okay, go back through the loop, pull it tight. That creates a knot. And then I will go back and I'll just kind of weave the needle back through some of the lines of the wool, just to kind of embed the strand. Take your scissors and trim it off, just like so. And then you can go back through and do the middle line and then the S. Alright, so we're starting in on the S. It's a S shape. The ends are neither straight up nor straight sideways, they're at an angle over here. And a little bit. I started about not quite the 2 o'clock position, somewhere in between the 1 and the 2, probably a little closer to 2, right at the edge. The other thing that I like to do with the S when I'm freehanding it, so I'll start it there, but I will also mark out my halfway points. I will mark the very middle of this, so at 2.5, like that. So that way I know, so that the first line is going to come up, it's going to be the big circle on the top part of the S and the little circle on the bottom part. Make sure that we're not overshooting here at the bottom. And then I'll make sure, and I'll add some guides when we get closer down. So I marked the very middle because what's going to happen when I bring that middle line of the S around, the middle line needs to go directly down here. So this line that I'm going to do is going to come and it's going to be a 1/2 inch over here to the other side of the S. So start, and actually same deal here. I'm just going to mark the middle of it. I could eyeball this if I wanted to, but sometimes I just like having that visual guide. Bring it around, and as I'm freehanding this, I'm looking to hit this edge a little bit below where it started over here. And I've done enough of these by now that I have a pretty solid idea in my head of how this this S, the U and the S look, so I can, which is why I can freehand them the way I can. And if you're not at all confident, mark it out ahead of time, put on, draw it out, put the paper template on, sew through the paper template, whatever you're comfortable with. If you want to freehand it, go for it. Another thing is I've known a few guys who have gone and they will cut out the U and the S out of a piece of paper, pin it down, and they'll do the outside and the inside around the edge of that paper, then pull it off and do the middle paper. And so that works perfectly well as well. You can do that with the pattern that we send with these blankets. It's, you just cut it out, cut it a little bit narrower than an inch to account for the space that you'll take up while stitching. Alright, so now you see I marked the dead center here and I'm coming down a little below that dead center mark. Alright, so now another thing that I do here is I'm going to mark from wherever the bottom of this is, I am going to mark a 1/2 inch up from the bottom, and I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch in from the side. So these are my boundaries for, I just make a little cross. This is where, so I know where that inside line of the S is going to go. So that I can make it a nice round shape and not some sort of funky little loop, but also give myself enough space to do the outside line. Take the pen out once you reach that point. And I'm also going to mark here about where I'd want the outside line to end. I'm going to mark in at an angle up, pointing towards the upper end. I'm going to mark that one as well, so that way I have an end target. And I'm sure many of you have watched the Civil War Digest episode doing the U.S. on a blanket. This is really not that dissimilar from that. It's just a different pattern on an early war blanket versus, if I remember right, that was a later war blanket that they did on the Civil War Digest. But all very similar. This is chain stitch. Some patterns just had a running stitch going in and out, but for these late war blankets, this would be a chain stitch that you need to use. Pull some of these pins out, and again, flip it over. Tie it off with a little loop, run it back through, just catch a couple threads. This is just so that it doesn't come undone. Clip it, and voila. And, okay, so that's where I'm at so far. And I will go back through and I'll add the other line of this S, come around over here, and then I'll add a middle on both of them, and I'll put the finished picture at the end. And that is how you do that. At least that's how I freehand it. And for those who don't want to freehand it, this is the pattern that we will send along with these, along with the yarn. All you need to do is take this, take some pins, pin it on, one at each corner. Maybe one in the middle as well. Pin it onto your blanket right in the middle. Make sure that it's oriented this side level with the black stripe, and then you just can stitch right through the paper. It is going to be a little harder. You have to push a little harder with the needle. I'm not a fan, but if you don't trust yourself to freehand it, this is very helpful. Or you can get like a transfer paper, put it behind it. You can also just take, like I was saying, chalkboard, just chalkboard chalk, white chalkboard chalk, take it, color really heavy on the back side, then press it down onto the blanket, and then press really hard with like a stick or your fingernail, and then that will transfer the chalk line onto the blanket. And then you can stitch and follow the blanket line from there. If you have any questions, please ask, and we're happy to help you out with getting the US stitched on your blanket. Thank you all, and happy campaigning.